Okay, in this next lesson, we're going to be talking about congruent triangles. And so congruent triangles are triangles that have the same shape and the same size. This means that all corresponding parts are the lines and the angles that are in the same position. So all of those angles and sides have to be congruent. So all corresponding sides have to be the same and all corresponding angles have to be the same. So in order to show congruent triangles, we write congruency statements. So when triangles are congruent, we can write a congruency statement, and that is to name the triangle, such as triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. And the reason it has to go in that order is that if you look here, angle A has one arc in it. Well, if you look at the other triangle, which angle has only one arc? That would be D. So therefore, A and D have to match up. Then you look for the angle that has two marks. B has two marks, and so does E. Well, B and E match up. They're in the same spot. They are corresponding angles. And then C has three tick marks, so F has three tick marks. Therefore, C and F are in the same spot in that congruency statement. A valid congruency statement must match all corresponding angles and all corresponding sides. Okay, so we can look at here, we can look at the sides. Here in this statement, I have side AB. AB has one tick mark. What side has one tick mark on the other one? Okay, DE. Well, there's DE in the statement. BC has two tick marks. Okay, here's BC right here. What other side has two tick marks? EF. There's EF in the statement. So they all correspond. They all line up. Okay, so now we have something called CPCTC. And that the next thing that we need to know is CPCTC, and that stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Now this will be something very important that we use when we are proving triangles congruent. Now if all of the corresponding parts in a triangle, in congruent triangles, they have to be congruent. If the triangles are congruent, then all corresponding angles and all corresponding sides have to be congruent. So now let's look at some of these congruency statements, and we're going to list, if I know this statement, I can list which angles and which sides are congruent. So here on number 1, I have triangle JKL is congruent to triangle PQR. So I can just look at this statement and figure out which angles and which sides are congruent. And I don't even have to draw the picture. So if you look, I have 3 angles in this first triangle. They're going to be angle J, angle K, and angle L. I also have 3 angles in the second triangle, angle P, angle Q, and angle R. So all I've got to do is corresponding angles. They're going to be in the same order. So angle J is going to be congruent to, since it's the first letter, it's going to be congruent to the angle that's the first letter in the second statement. So it's going to be congruent to angle P. Angle K is going to be congruent, since it's the second letter, it's going to be congruent to the second letter, angle Q. And then angle L is going to be congruent, since it's the third letter, it's going to be congruent to angle R. Sides are very similar, except with sides we name them with 2 letters, not 1 letter. So I can take each of these, I can find 3 different sets of sides. My first set of sides is going to be JK. Okay, so side JK is going to be congruent to side, well, that's the first and the second letter, so it's going to be congruent to the first and the second letter, which is PQ. Now I'm going to do KL. That's another side. It's going to be congruent to, it's the second and the third letter, so it's going to be congruent to the second and the third letter, which is QR. And then my third set of sides is going to be JL. It's the set that I have not used yet. And it's going to be congruent. It's the first and the third letter, so it's going to be congruent to PR. Okay, now pause the video and you try number 2. Okay, looking at number 3. Given that triangle QPM is congruent to triangle AYC, let's now see, that's our congruent statement. Let's see what parts are actually congruent. Can we fill in the rest of the statements? So KM, here is KM. What is it going to be congruent to? What side corresponds with KM? KM's this long side. It's going to correspond, it's going to be congruent to this side AC. If it's hard to tell looking at the triangles, look in your statement. KM is the first and the last, so the first and the last is AC. What about CY? Side CY, I'm going to put 2 hash marks or tick marks because it's a different set. It is going to be congruent to the smaller side. Make sure I wrote it the right way, CY. If I look back at the statement up top, C is the last letter, then Y is the second letter. So I'm going to do the same thing here. It's going to be congruent to MP. And then the last side is K. Put 3 tick marks. So let's look. PK is the second first letter, so it's going to be congruent to YA. Now let's look at the angles. Angle Y is going to be congruent to angle P. We can see that in the diagram. Also, we can see that Y is the second letter, so it's going to be congruent to angle P. K is going to be congruent to angle A. K is the first. Angle A is the first letter. Angle ACY. ACY is this one. So it's going to be congruent to KMP. Angle KMP. What about angle triangle MPK? Triangle MPK. Let's look. MPK, they wrote it backwards, MPK. So all we got to do is take the second one, triangle, and write it backwards. CYA. And then what about triangle YAC? Well, they went second, first, third. So I'm going to do the same thing and reorder the letters. Second would be P. Then first would be K. And then third would be M. Okay, let's look at number 4. Given that triangle STW is congruent to triangle BFN, find each missing measure. Okay, so if these two triangles are congruent, corresponding sides are congruent. So BN, here's BN, is going to be congruent hold on. Okay, sorry, we're back. So BN right here is going to be congruent to SW. Those are the same. So if SW is 9 centimeters, then BN is also 9 centimeters. TW, well, here's this one. It is congruent to FN. TW, second, third, FN, second, third. So that means TW has to be 14 centimeters. And then BF has to be congruent to ST, which means that it is 17 centimeters. And then angle W, so let's look at the angles. Angle W is congruent to angle N, so that means it is 82 degrees. Angle B, right here, is congruent to angle S, which means it is 67 degrees. And finally, angle F is congruent to angle T. Well, I don't know, neither of those have a measurement, but I do know that B is 67. So I can add 82 and 67 and then subtract that from 180 because the angles in a triangle equal 180, and that would give me angle F as 31 degrees. Okay, you pause the video and you try number 5. Okay, looking at 6. Here I'm given that UVW is congruent to TSR. Find the values of X, Y, and Z. Okay, so to find X, that's UV. It is congruent. UV is congruent to TS, so it's congruent to that side. So I can write an equation. 12x minus 7 equals 53. Add the 7. 12x equals 60. So x will equal 5. Okay, now the y. Y is here on RS. It is congruent to WV, which is 57. So I can do the same thing. 5y minus 33 equals 57. Add the 33. 5y is going to equal 90. Divide by 5. And y equals 1/4. So y equals 18. And then finally to find z, let's see, z is here on this side. So it's going to be congruent, UW is congruent to TR. So we're going to do the same thing. 3z plus 14 equals 50. So I'm going to subtract the 14. 3z equals 36. And so z is going to equal 12. Okay, now I want you to try 7 and 8.